Ever wonder what really happened behind the velvet curtains of old Hollywood? For all the glitz and glamour, some of the biggest icons carried secrets the studios desperately tried to bury. What drove legends to risk everything for hidden passions? And just how far would the moguls go to keep the public in the dark? Get ready, because this isn't the Hollywood story you've seen on the silver screen. Stay tuned. What you're about to hear might just change how you see these stars forever. Errol Flynn. If you think today's headlines are wild, you've never met Errol Flynn, the original bad boy of the silver screen. Studios sold him as the perfect swashbuckler, swinging swords and rescuing damsels, but off-camera, Flynn's real adventures made his movies look tame. The man collected headlines for wild parties that left the gossip columnists gasping for breath. He was charming, reckless, and so obsessed with living on the edge that friends called it Flynn-itis. Flynn's private life became public scandal, but he didn't seem to care. He laughed in the face of danger and even bigger headlines. By the time his career cooled, Flynn's conquests and constant need for excitement had worn him down. In the end, Flynn became Hollywood's cautionary tale, a star who burned so bright he left everyone else blinking in the dark. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner wasn't just the most beautiful woman in the world, she was a force of nature. MGM called her the world's most beautiful animal, and they weren't kidding. Behind the studio gloss, Gardner lived fast and chased thrills wherever she found them. Her romances were the stuff of legend, but what few knew was that Ava could never sit still. She'd fall for dangerous men, sweep into wild parties, and when the cameras weren't rolling, seek out new thrills that would leave her friends and rivals in shock. Her hunger for excitement made her impossible to pin down. Ava's private life was a tornado. Her marriages to Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra were just the tip of the iceberg. She once quipped, "I either write the story or live it." For Gardner, it was always about chasing the next unforgettable moment, no matter the cost. Gable. Clark Gable had a grin that could melt ice, but his real legacy wasn't just Gone with the Wind, it was the trail of broken hearts and studio headaches he left behind. Dubbed the King of Hollywood, Gable had a reputation for being insatiable, restless, and impossible to tie down. Behind every leading lady was a rumor, and Gable's private life was an open secret among the studio insiders. He'd sweep co-stars off their feet, then move on to the next, leaving whispers and studio bosses scrambling for cover. Gable's urge to chase new thrills was matched only by his fear of being bored. The studios did their best to protect their cash cow, but even they couldn't keep the real Gable under wraps forever. In the end, Gable's legacy is a testament to how the biggest stars often battle demons no director could ever script. Judy Garland. Beneath the sparkle of Oz and the roar of 1,000 fans, Judy Garland was always searching for something she could never quite find. MGM kept her under the harshest lights, and the public saw only the happy songs and dazzling smile. But the real Garland struggled with a need for connection that was as intense as her talent. Her marriages were stormy, her friendships often tangled with heartbreak, and she chased affection and new experiences as if they might finally fill the emptiness left by the studio's constant pressure. Garland's private life became a maze of complicated relationships, desperate late-night calls, and whispered scandals. Hollywood tried to control her every move, but Judy was always one step ahead, following her own desires even as they led her into chaos. In the end, Garland's story is one of longing, survival, and the price of living without a safety net. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead was Hollywood's answer to a hurricane, unpredictable, irresistible, and impossible to ignore. She was bold, brash, and never shy about seeking out new adventures, on and off the stage. Bankhead's appetite for excitement was legendary. She reveled in breaking rules and scandalizing the uptight Hollywood crowd. Friends said she was addicted to life at full speed, and the parties she threw became infamous for their wild energy and lack of boundaries. Bankhead's career soared and crashed by turns, always fueled by her need to shock, to be loved, and to live on her own terms. She once said, "My heart is as wild as my reputation." For Tallulah, the only real sin was being dull, and that's something nobody ever accused her of being. Tracy. Spencer Tracy was Hollywood's serious man, the actor with the granite jaw and the thousand-yard stare. But behind those steady eyes was a restlessness that never let up. Tracy built his reputation on hard work and quiet strength, but his private life was anything but quiet. Known for his constant need for new companionship and the rush of the chase, Tracy moved through a string of affairs that kept even the most experienced gossip writers guessing. His legendary romance with Katharine Hepburn was only part of the story. Tracy's craving for connection often left a trail of whispered rumors and worried studio bosses. He wrestled with his own guilt and contradictions, but the thrill always called him back. To many who knew him, Tracy was chasing something just out of reach, a spark, a comfort, a distraction. In Hollywood, some legends are remembered for the roles they played. Tracy? He was remembered for the stories the cameras never caught. Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was a billionaire, an aviation pioneer, and Hollywood's most unpredictable playboy. The studios called him eccentric, but that barely scratched the surface. Hughes surrounded himself with aspiring actresses, always seeking out new faces and new stories. He'd sign contracts with starlets just to spend time with them, and the tabloids could barely keep up with his string of romances. Hughes built secret hideaways for his private encounters, and his obsession with pursuing passion became legendary. Some said he kept a detailed diary of every conquest. The moguls tried to keep him in check, but nobody could put a leash on Hughes. In his world, rules didn't apply. Hughes chased after adventure with the same intensity he brought to his movies and his airplanes, and it left behind a trail of whispers that still echo through Hollywood history. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's life was pure drama, both on and off the screen. She reigned as a queen of the silver screen, but behind the flawless makeup and controlled smile, Crawford battled cravings that the studios never wanted the public to see. She was known for her passionate affairs and her restless search for new connections, sometimes with fellow stars, sometimes with the industry's most eligible bachelors. Crawford's appetite for attention was so intense that friends and rivals alike spoke in awe of her energy. She was always on the move, seeking validation in every new relationship and every glitzy party. Crawford's determination was legendary, and so was her refusal to settle for anything ordinary. In a town that demanded perfection, Joan Crawford played by her own rules. The studios could only hope to keep up. Lana Turner? Lana Turner was Hollywood's sweater girl, the starlet whose looks stopped traffic and whose private life kept the tabloids in business. She was never content with routine or predictability. Turner chased after excitement like a moth to a flame. Her romances with actors, musicians, and even notorious figures became the stuff of legend. Turner was addicted to the drama of new love, always leaping from one adventure to the next. She married 8 times, and each relationship was a roller coaster. Friends said Lana was never truly happy unless she was in the middle of something wild and unpredictable. For Turner, every new romance promised a fresh thrill, and every heartbreak just pushed her to chase the next big spark. In Hollywood, she proved that sometimes the wildest stories are the ones you don't see on the screen. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was the original rebel, a man who changed acting forever and lived his life as if every rule was meant to be broken. Brando's off-screen adventures were as infamous as his on-screen genius. He admitted in later years that his appetite for pleasure was endless, and his list of partners read like a who's who of classic Hollywood. Brando chased after connection, comfort, and the thrill of the unpredictable, often throwing himself into new affairs with wild abandon. Colleagues marveled at his magnetism, but even they couldn't keep up with his ever-changing loves. Brando was restless, impulsive, and never satisfied for long. For him, the chase was as important as the prize. In the end, Brando's real legacy might not be his Oscar-winning roles, but the wild, untamed way he lived when the cameras stopped rolling. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a superstar, she was Hollywood's ultimate headline magnet. Behind her violet eyes and million-dollar smile was a hunger for drama that even her blockbuster films couldn't satisfy. Taylor's romances and marriages, 8 in total, were legendary for their speed and intensity. She jumped from one passionate whirlwind to another, rarely pausing to catch her breath. Friends said she craved affection, excitement, and the high of new beginnings. Her relationships with Richard Burton were so fiery they became the subject of global gossip, breaking taboos and leaving studio execs scrambling. Taylor herself joked that she was always looking for the next great love, never content to play by anyone else's rules. Her quest for romance and connection led to incredible highs and soul-crushing lows. In a town built on illusion, Taylor made her desires front-page news. Through every headline, scandal, and broken vow, she showed the world that living boldly, even messily, was the only way she knew how. Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford was the Rat Pack's charming outsider, a British import with matinee idol looks and a reputation for chasing excitement. He became infamous for his relentless pursuit of new romances, always the first to turn up at Hollywood's most exclusive parties. Lawford was rarely seen without a stunning companion on his arm, and stories of his conquests made him a favorite target of gossip columnists. Insiders said Lawford was never satisfied with calm or predictability. He thrived on adventure and the adrenaline rush of the chase. His connections to the Kennedy family only added fuel to the fire, making his escapades front-page news. Lawford's appetite for fresh experiences kept him in constant motion, often leaving a trail of heartbreak in his wake. He joked about his own compulsions, but the truth was, he could never slow down. Lawford's legacy is one of non-stop pursuit, a man who lived for the next thrill, the next party, and the next story worth telling. John Barrymore. Long before tabloids were a thing, John Barrymore was already a living legend and a walking headline. Barrymore was magnetic, reckless, and famously unpredictable. He was drawn to new experiences the way a moth is drawn to light, leaping from one adventure to another. Hollywood insiders whispered about his endless parade of romances, each more dramatic than the last. Barrymore's need for passion and excitement was insatiable, and his wild escapades became part of his myth. He once reportedly said, "Happiness comes in spurts." For Barrymore, each new romance was a search for that fleeting spark. Directors, co-stars, and even studio bosses learned to expect chaos when Barrymore was on set. But behind the bravado was a man always looking for something he couldn't quite find, a sense of completion that forever slipped through his fingers. In Hollywood, his appetite for adventure made him a legend, both on the screen and off. Rooney. Mickey Rooney was proof that big personalities can come in small packages. Standing just over 5 feet tall, Rooney had a life that was anything but small. He rose to fame as America's favorite boy next door, but behind the wholesome image was a man with an unending need for romance and excitement. Rooney was married 8 times and had even more well-known affairs. His fellow actors joked that he changed partners as often as he changed costumes. Rooney's adventures and constant search for new excitement often landed him in the headlines and in hot water with studio bosses who tried, unsuccessfully, to rein him in. He was always on the lookout for the next thrill, never satisfied for long. Rooney's real-life drama sometimes overshadowed his on-screen charm, but he wouldn't have had it any other way. For Mickey, the show never stopped, and neither did his wild pursuit of adventure. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, bold, brash, and utterly unforgettable. She stunned audiences with her platinum hair and sultry gaze, but Harlow's off-screen life was even more explosive. Insiders knew her as a woman constantly in search of new passions and adventure. She threw herself into whirlwind romances, dazzling the men who chased her and surprising even her closest friends with her boldness. Harlow's impulsiveness was legendary. She'd spark new relationships on set, at parties, and anywhere excitement could be found. Studio bosses tried to rein her in, but Harlow lived for the thrill of the chase and the electric charge of new connections. Even as rumors swirled and the tabloids speculated, Harlow never slowed down. She played by her own rules, never afraid to break hearts or have hers broken. In a Hollywood obsessed with control, Harlow was a wild card, living fast and chasing every moment of passion life had to offer. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was the ultimate screen siren, glamorous, mysterious, and adored by millions. But behind the smoldering looks and iconic dance numbers, Hayworth battled a longing for affection that never seemed to fade. Her string of high-profile marriages and love affairs became the stuff of Hollywood legend. Hayworth was drawn to powerful men, each romance more dramatic than the last. She sought comfort in new relationships, craving the excitement of fresh beginnings and the hope that someone might finally fill the emptiness she carried. Insiders said Hayworth's restlessness often left her heartbroken, but she was never afraid to fall in love again and again. The studios tried to shape her image, but Hayworth's real story was much messier and much more human. She was always in search of the next spark, the next adventure, even when it meant risking everything. For Rita Hayworth, love was both a blessing and a curse, a roller coaster she could never quite step off. James Dean. James Dean was the very definition of a Hollywood rebel, with a mystique that still lingers decades later. He was a star whose brief life was packed with passion, speed, and constant change. Off-screen, Dean's need for new experiences and wild relationships kept Hollywood buzzing. He jumped headfirst into new romances, often leaving chaos and heartbreak behind. Friends described Dean as both deeply sensitive and endlessly restless, forever searching for connection but never settling for long. Rumors about his private escapades filled the studio lots and gossip pages. Dean thrived on risk, whether it was on a motorcycle, behind the wheel, or in the company of someone new. His appetite for adventure was legendary, and it made him both magnetic and impossible to predict. Even as his fame soared, Dean's private life stayed turbulent, a whirlwind of emotions and adrenaline. For Dean, living on the edge wasn't just an act, it was a way of life. Cary Grant. Cary Grant was the ultimate leading man, suave, debonair, and always cool under pressure. But beneath that polished exterior, Grant's private life was a labyrinth of longing and endless reinvention. He moved through Hollywood's social circles with ease, but he was constantly searching for something more. Grant's string of marriages and affairs was the talk of Tinseltown, each relationship marked by an intensity that kept him and his partners on their toes. Friends said Grant was never truly satisfied, always looking for a new spark or adventure. He reinvented himself time and again, both on screen and off, chasing new experiences wherever they might lead. Grant's personal life was shrouded in rumors, but one thing was certain. He lived for excitement and connection. Whether at a glamorous party or in a quiet moment behind closed doors, Grant was always chasing a feeling he could never quite hold on to. For him, life was a grand pursuit, and he played the part perfectly. Tierney. Jean Tierney dazzled audiences with her luminous beauty and haunting screen presence, but her real life was anything but a fairy tale. Beneath her poised exterior, Tierney was driven by a restless need for passion and new beginnings. Hollywood insiders whispered about her ever-shifting romances and the whirlwind affairs that shaped her life. Tierney was rarely satisfied with routine. She gravitated toward new excitement, often at the expense of stability. Her heart chased novelty, and she wasn't afraid to pursue it, even when it meant scandal or heartbreak. Friends described her as both dreamy and daring, a star always searching for a connection that would finally complete her. The studios tried to smooth over her wild side, but Tierney's hunger for experience couldn't be tamed. In the end, her search for affection and adventure made her story as unforgettable as any of her film roles, full of drama, longing, and endless reinvention. Mae West. If old Hollywood had a queen of double entendres and bold living, it was Mae West. She wasn't just a movie star, she was a phenomenon. Famous for her witty one-liners and unfiltered style, West's real-life quest for adventure matched her on-screen persona. She filled her life with excitement, moving through one flirtation after another, always on her own terms. West's parties were legendary, and she surrounded herself with admirers who craved her approval. She openly celebrated her pursuit of pleasure, challenging the era's strict moral codes and delighting in the shock it caused. Studio executives tried to tone her down, but West was always 2 steps ahead, too clever and too determined to ever be boxed in. Her appetite for fun and connection became a central part of her legacy, making her a trailblazer who proved that living large and chasing joy could become an art form. West never just played a part, she lived it.